So maybe I will start from choosing one of the questions in the book, and I will ask you this question, and you can answer it. And then as you answer the question, infranodus will give me some ideas for what I could ask you next. And also I will use the additional questions from the book to elaborate on the answers. So let's say we start from the very first question in the book, which says, if you could experience this world through a different perspective for a week, which three would you choose?
Well, so I guess my first spontaneous answer will be to choose a perspective from a person that can provide me like a completely different way of accessing the world or looking at the world. I will try to find profile or qualities or mindsets, worldviews that are different than mine to see how do they render real the world, with the possibility also to compare and to see what does it mean to be in somebody else's worldview or somebody else's value system or somebody else's ideology. So I find also a bit tricky to, or for me it's actually difficult to say then who is this other, who is this different person, because then what is the criteria that I use? Am I using identity, categories of identity, for example? Maybe it's not so interesting, or maybe it's too predictable. So yeah, is it based on the part of the world we live? Is it the age? Yeah, so that would be something challenging to say. Like, for example, what our 90-year-old person.
Sorry, which person?
Like a 90-year-old person that maybe lived 5,000 years ago, would be something definitely probably a big contrast to the way I see the world now. So maybe I will go for that, like the perspective of somebody else in time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And should it be like would it be a specific person that you know about, or just any person who's 90 years old who lived 1,000 years ago?
Well, maybe to have at least one common denominator, we could say that maybe somebody that was also engaged in any form of body practice. So to have more devices that can provide me this perspective that is not just something intellectual or connected to the ideology or the value system, but also how the body itself provides a perspective to the world. So that could be also interesting, like a body practitioner.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's now see practitioner. Let's now see what infranodus will recommend as the next question. So it visualizes what you just said as a graph. The most influential words according to graph analysis are world, perspective, body, render, and person, which kind of sums up your answer in a way. And also it shows the main topics with the different colors based on the words that you used and the connections between them. And here you have one which is about perspective that the body provides. The person lives in some long time ago and who is 90 years old. And then also how it would be interesting to have not a very predictable identity, and also how to render someone's worldview real. And then based on that, infranodus is proposing us to look at these topics, which we just did, and to then see if we can detect some interesting relations. So for example, it proposes us to think of the connections between these two topical clusters. One is the worldview render real, and it was used when you said that you would like to find a profile or a quality of worldviews that are different than mine, to see how they render the real world. So what would be the connection between that and the idea that you could use a predictable identity that would be not so interesting? So maybe the question here is, um, what makes for you interesting to see a worldview of someone who you cannot predict? Like, why do you have this particular aspiration for something like that?
Well, I guess that the intention will be to provide to myself an experience of alterity through which I can then return to my own self and being able to question it now to the experience of being somebody else. So I think that this will definitely make much more, it will make more relative all my positions in this world, and also maybe will increase the capacity of empathy. And this contrast might also maybe even shock to the extent that I cannot continue being the person that I am.
Okay, so let's see what would be the next question that the system proposes us to think about. So here it says that what about the connection between person year live? So this was about 90-year-old person who lived 1,000 years ago, and then your experience, how it makes your relative positions in this world and makes you question the world. So for example, here it's really clear. Why then also this interest in time? Because you said years, so 90 years old, 1,000 years ago. Is there some particular interest to find relevance in terms of the time scale that you're dealing with? Or you think this would be maybe the most shocking for you or most interesting? Why time?
Yes. Well, I guess when I want to be curious about something, time always increases my curiosity, because it's what I can witness every day. That is the main factor of change, time. So since time contributes to change, this is why I thought that this parameter can provide me such an experience of alterity, either because of the age or either because of the time history. Which the age still eventually possible for me. Who knows if I will live that long? But history is definitely impossible. So that will be also interesting if that actually could be possible to choose. It's like traveling in time.
Okay, let's see. So now we have this graph of what you just said. There is the world, provide, perspective, body, time, experience, contrast, person, age. Let's see if there is any other interesting recommendation. So for example, here, the interesting thing that it proposes at this point, when the graph becomes quite interconnected, that it says, okay, choose the most influential nodes. So the words that you use quite a lot are the word, perspective, provide, and then remove them from the graph to reveal other important patterns. And then based on these patterns, we start exploring the parts of your answer which are maybe not yet as much on the surface as the most influential term. So for example, here what comes up is that it says, okay, if we remove the idea of changing perspective, providing a different perspective and also perspective about the world, then what we see is that the graph, so here it says the graph is too biased towards the following nodes: age, time, person. So we talked a lot about just now actually how time is important and how age is important to experience another person or to change your own person. So then it proposes us to develop ideas on the periphery, something that renders the worldview real. So we can click on that and see in which context it was used. This idea of worldviews that are different than yours, to see how they render the real world and to compare it with your own worldview. Okay. And then another one, which was talking about this age. So there it makes me think, okay, if we're talking about different perspectives, and we already talked about years and the age and when the person lived, and then at the same time there is this importance to see another worldview. Can you think of something else? So this is also the continuation or the variation of the question in the book, actually. What other perspective would you choose? Like you named one, which is a 90-year-old person who lived 1,000 years ago. Is there anything that is completely different from that that you could think of that could provide you this render of a completely different worldview? That could be interesting.
Mhm. Well, I guess, for example, if we choose the parameter of identity politics and privilege, um,
Would
then I
you
will,
choose that?
if I choose, for example, just for the sake of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
uh, um, then it will be about choosing a profile that differs from my identities as much as possible, meaning that it's not a white European, that is not 40 years old in this case, etc., etc. So it will be about finding maybe the profile that doesn't match to any of my categories of identity, and then to live 1 week um, being this person, and then returning to my body or to my identity, and then all of a sudden being this clash, and that could be another answer.
And all of a sudden, you said being.
Returning to my own identity,
Mm-hmm.
there might be maybe a
Okay.
like a shocking effect.
Right. Okay. So let's now return the deleted words and then see which other connections it proposes. So world providing different perspective and choosing identity profile. So what you just said. Okay. So then this could be an identity that you choose to provide yourself a different perspective of the world. You mentioned what you would not like to experience, which is like what you are already, but what could that be then specifically? So I'm just following the question which is being asked here. What would be the specific profile that you would choose that would differ from your identity as much as possible? Can you think of something specific?
So I would be a person of color. Uh,
Of which color?
I would be a black person,
Okay.
um, transsexual.
Mm-hmm.
I will be 60 years old.
60 or 16. Young or
No,
old?
60.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Living in Brazil, for example.
Mm-hmm. Doing what?
Huh?
Doing what? Like, does this person have an occupation that they happen to be doing most of the time in their day, or they're more like enjoying their life in whatever way that the day brings them?
Could be a dancer.
A dancer.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess we would be seeing you at the Brazilian Carnival, no? Okay, let's add this in. Nice. You're building this cluster of the person now, this green one. It's actually becoming a very prominent topic in the whole answer because we really elaborated on the different people that you would like to be. And here infranodus is still interested in asking you the third, the last option. So what would you choose that would be the third option? Again, this connection between what kind of person you would choose and what kind of identity profile. So you said already old person living 1,000 years ago, you said someone completely different from you. And it's asking again, like, what could be something else? And I think it also goes in the spirit of the book because this is just a little footnote. Every question in the book comes with a lot of variants, almost to exhaust the possible range of answers that you could give. Because what we found in our conversational practice with you, Diego, I think that when you keep on asking the question over and over again, when you start to exhaust it, there is some really interesting stuff that tend to come up because once we go, and deal with the surface, there's always some kind of like it's harder to then think, okay, what else would it be? And then you start questioning more maybe the reasons why you're choosing certain things or why you didn't choose something and so on. And so I like, yeah, it just goes in the spirit of the book. So I would just like to ask you one other last example of the personality, and then we can move on in the questions.
Okay, so for example, it will be the parameter I would choose would be education. So maybe to have received an education completely different than mine.
And
So
what is your
maybe
education, and what would be different?
well, maybe somebody that didn't didn't go to the so-called institutional education like school or university,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody that maybe because of the family works in the field or with any other family uh, business or job.
Mm-hmm.
Since I was a kid, I had to learn this profession, and but at the same time learning about, for example, the techniques, different practices, and so on. So that would be something that maybe I would choose.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see at what is the graph that we have created. Okay, interesting. Look at this. University education is becoming like its own little uh, island in this, which is nice because it shows that there is like a deviation that happens through it from the main discourse. All right. So then, I mean, in the infranodus itself, when the graph has diversified network structure and high mind viral immunity, it means that it's pretty diverse in terms of the range of the topics that it covers, and it also has a lot of different nodes. So I think we kind of revealed this topic sufficiently. And now the next step in the book would be to go and see if there is any variance of the question that could help us maybe think more about the reasons why we chose something or explore a little bit more the periphery of this topic. So, for example, in the variants that we have to the question in the book, we wrote already that you can choose anyone you want, any type of person, profession, social status, or type of identity, or somebody well known. This is something that we didn't actually mention, or maybe you were not so interested in being someone well known. I know that some people choose to be someone famous. Like a lot of people say Trump, for example. Do you also have this experience of hearing that people say that they would like to be Trump when you ask this question? Or not so much?
No,
No? I had a lot of people answering that they would like to feel what it's like to be Trump for some reason. I don't know. But this was something that tended to come up a lot. And then also why did you make this choice? This is another question. This you elaborated already. And then who would it be if you had to choose someone whose perspective would be totally different from yours? So this is also something you covered. Maybe something you don't wish to be, but that provide you the most radically different perspective of the world. So this is also, I think, an important notice that when we answer this question, it's not only about what you want to be, it could be something that you don't want to be because maybe you reject the experience that you would have if you were this person, and this is what makes this question interesting, and what can make it interesting, what can make the answer interesting also for yourself, like to try something that you wouldn't like to be. Um, and I guess, I mean, this is it. You covered pretty extensively this question. So maybe if you don't mind, I would move on to another one. What do you think?
Mhm.
Yeah? Okay, so let me just see what questions we have that would be following the spirit of the book, something completely different than what I just asked. For instance, let me check. Okay, maybe this one is pretty. There is a lot about dying, but maybe something a bit less finite, more kind of like into the continuation. Okay. Do you want something that is personal or less personal? Because a lot of questions are quite personal. I don't know if you want to talk about them in
Yeah, I'm
the.
fine.
You're
Fine
fine
with
with that? Okay, so maybe let's do this one. Uh, let's do the one which is kind of like it's reflected through several different questions. So I don't know if it's going to make it into the book in the same shape, but let's say this one. Uh, it's number 8. Let me just, I know, it's number 10. Okay, what was the most mystical experience that you've had in your life, and why did it seem to be so?
Well, it is. There is some small paradox now because the mystical aspect makes difficult to speak about it. Um, I'm thinking of experiences with, for example, psychedelics, or but there was I remember like maybe the very first time that I had a mystical experience. I was maybe 6 years old, 7 years old, and I was walking with my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we were walking for very long up the mountain in Valencia, and it was the daytime, close to the sunset. And finally, after this long walk, we arrived into a kind of it was a religious building. Um, how is it called? A monastery on the top of the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
and exactly the sunset was behind this building. And I remember that this golden light was blinding us, or blinding me as we were walking towards it. But at the same time, this kind of sensation of being blinded by this golden light was also at the same time as if a portal is opening, and there would be some another dimension opening there. So I was very small, and I remember that I have this really tattoo on my on my memory. That's a very strong uh, experience. Which I felt that something was going on there, but I didn't know exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we have this graph forming from it with quite a lot of different concepts and topics. And here it says about sunset in the mountains and then mystical experience and the connections between them. So can you maybe say what was mystical in that sunset and blinding sensation of the portal? Did you think about it at the time, or can you think now what was so striking about it?
Yeah, I think that through this light, I had maybe some experience of revelation or something like the presence of some kind of divinity, or maybe the sun itself can be a divinity. But it turned on a flame inside of me, maybe the flame of believing that there is something or another reality, or believing that there is something else.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now it says that let's talk about something else rather than the experience of divinity and the blinding experience. Here it proposes us to focus on the peripheral ideas of what you just said. So the opening portal and the divinity, flame, sun. Maybe what was the connection between the idea that the portal is opening and this flame of the sun? So is there something else to say about this link? Maybe like can you think why the
Also
sun?
the fact that I
Mm-hmm.
was working with my grandfather, who in that time was a person that wouldn't really talk too much because he was already somewhere else in his mind. I think he was already in a different reality.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think that I was also halfway inside his own. Uh, maybe I was also affected or influenced by his presence. The fact that we were also for so long hiking and going up the mountain, the physical effort, maybe the exhaustion, and finally you arrive into the top of the mountain. So there is this kind of a rewarding image. Uh, yeah, so it was also the timing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Blinding. And then mountain set. Do you know why the blinding? So here proposes to make the connection between this act of walking and something being blinding on the one side here, and then the mountain and the sunset. Um, do you know why this blinding aspect for you? What was there something mystical in the blinding itself?
Well, maybe of the presence of a powerful being that you cannot even look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
or something that with your eyes you cannot have a perception of it. You need a different faculty.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here we have a proposition to think of the connection between. And also the sun, right? So it says here that you also had this experience of the divine experience from the object, like the sun or the mountains kind of like covering this image also. And then at the same time also this idea that it's too much and you cannot handle it. So was it some kind of experience that there is something bigger than you that was connected to you, to this idea of mystical experience? Like, is this actually necessary for a mystical experience to be something that you cannot comprehend?
Definitely some kind of idea of the sublime associated to spirituality, the fact that also there was this monastery there, and who knows, maybe I forgot, but there were some bells, the sound of some bells even at some point that I cannot recall now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
Important
then,
to mention we were
mm-hmm.
not a religious family, so I was not maybe influenced by any specific religion. This is why I think that the mystical here goes beyond any form of religion.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. The mystical goes beyond any form of religion. Mm-hmm. Okay. Have a pretty nicely formed graph. So we're talking about blinding, time, walking, religious, but not the kind of religious experience, sublime reality here, and then mystical experience, the expression of divinity. So let's just select some of the typical nodes and remove them from the graph, see what's hiding behind, try to focus a bit on that maybe if there is something interesting. Experience thinking, so there is one here. Divinity, mountains, flame. Maybe as here it's proposing to think of this idea of like remembering the experience and then also living through the experience. So I wanted to ask you, which also goes in the direction that the book likes to work, is there a lot of times in the present when you actually experience this kind of stuff, or do you only have them in memory? Like how is your life now in terms of the mystical experiences? Are you having them?
yeah, mostly through psychedelic experience.
Mm-hmm. And do you also keep them in memories? And why did you choose particularly this one, for instance, now and not the one that you
It,
experienced recently?
it is the first experience of the mystical that I can recall in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what was the last one then? If it's something you feel comfortable sharing, of course. Maybe some mystical experiences we also want to keep to ourselves. So,
Well, to find the last one now is very challenging.
sorry.
To come up with the last one,
Mm-hmm.
it's challenging to be very precise with what was the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, maybe there is also such a thing as the everyday mystical. Like it doesn't need to be this one. I mean, it doesn't need to be this event that happens only once in life. That maybe every day there is always the mystical in front of us somehow, and the ineffable things that they go beyond our faculties of being able to describe or to talk about. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, for example, every time that you don't understand, I don't even understand myself, and there's this situation of also confronting myself with the finitude of my existence in this kind of huge city, or
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes these kind of situations that feel impotent when making sense out of what is happening to you, um, and then for some kind of magic, instead of letting it be as a kind of negative feeling, you manage to channel it into some kind of epiphanic experience,
Mm-hmm.
from where you can learn something, or from where you can actually recognize yourself as what you are, a very small thing.
Yeah. You said a very small thing in the end.
Sorry.
Or, yeah?
Mhm.
Who is? Like in general? You as a person who realizes or recognizes yourself in front of
Exactly.
that. Okay. Mm-hmm. When you look at the graph, can you think of something else in relation to this question that could be somehow stimulating for you? We have the time, walking, blinding, mountain, kind of situation, mystical experience, divinity. I can also remove the things that we already talked about and see if we can.
Well, what I will say is that, for example, in this question,
Mm-hmm.
the word mystical, there is not explained, or let's say it's not defined.
Mm-hmm.
So the person who is reading the question or listening to the question is going to interpret this word in their own terms. For some people, mystical might mean something different than for others.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm wondering if this question could also have like um, some variations or clarification in terms of what if the mystical is associated with spirituality, or religion, or what if the mystical is associated with perception and
Mm-hmm.
existence, or could be also bringing these different directions of understanding the mystical. So
Mm-hmm.
also it makes this person also confront a different idea of mystical than what they already have.
Mm-hmm. But could you, for example, answer this question if I asked you what was the religious mystical experience that you had, considering that you did not really have any, you said, as you are not into a religion? Or that would be the task of the question, to try to search for that kind of mystical experience also in your life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get this back. What I also like to do is to compare the two answers. So, for example, you had this one here where you answered about the mystical experiences. So we've got like the graph here, and then I want to compare it with the previous one that we did. So I will just open them at the same time, overlaid on top of each other. And what can also be nice actually is to see. So this is them both at the same time. Like the first question, the first answer, which was about trying to take a different perspective in life. So actually, we can do it a bit differently. We can make it like this, that we overlay them to see what is the similarity in between the two. So here you see the similarity is that it's talking about experience, time, person, perspective, So both questions, they touch on this idea of the person and the perspective and time, which was quite important. But then the rest was different. And for example, what can also be interesting to see is what was in the first one that was not in the second. So for example, here we see that, okay, in the first one you talked about choosing education, different kind of practice, identity, world, but that was not in the second one. And then if we reverse the places, we can also see that the difference between the mystical, so what was in the mystical but not in the different perspective, was about this idea of confronting something bigger than you, and also this landscape, because you were describing the landscape quite a lot, like the mountain, the sun, and so on, and the blinding. So the feeling that you had. And why I like to do this comparison is because it's always a nice way to inform a little bit, like to see, okay, how I could also evolve a little bit the answer to this question, or to enhance it. So for example, I would ask then, inspired by this graph, another question back to the first one. So kind of like a little parcel which would come from this answer into the first answer. You mentioned in this one, like you talked about your feelings quite a lot, like let's say that it was something blinding, that it was something bigger than you, that it was like in the memory. There was also the landscape, the the sun, that you had this experience, the feeling that you were with your grandfather, and that he was also old and maybe out a little bit in his own world. And so you had like a lot of feelings in there. And then could you think of any perspective that you could travel into, if we think about the first question again, that would be kind of like maybe focused a little bit more on these experiences that you can have, like the visions, the experiences that you can have that are very specific? Can you think of something else that you would like to be in this way, like that you would like to try out?
Yeah, it's a nice way of bringing the two questions together, because now I could use the second question as the criteria to answer the first one. So,
Mm-hmm.
whose perspective of the mystical I would like to live during the week? No, imagine that
Mm-hmm.
in this case, then I would try then to find, I mean, either people that I know, which I don't know right now, but either people that I know, or some people that might have also, or they claim to have these experiences of the mystical, either because they are associated to spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
or to some kind of idea of tripping, or so. Yeah, that would be interesting also. Like,
Mm-hmm. So like a priest or someone who is like, I don't know, a shaman or something like this.
exactly, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like or the other, on the other side, like a very devoted person,
Which
because
person, sorry?
a devoted person,
Ah,
because
mm-hmm. Yeah.
usually maybe it's actually the other way around, that the people who are in power, these spiritual figures, maybe actually they are not that spiritual. It's more about the position that they occupy, but maybe the devoted people who are following these figures are actually much more capable
Mm.
of the experiences than the person in power.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah, that would be interesting to see a person that has a lot of faith,
mm-hmm.
or a person that can trip, into other dimensions, or
Yeah.
have such a sensibility to enter into the unknown layers of the world. And
I will put the three dots here and to then unspeakable, which I think is a nice way to summarize this. It's nice, actually. I like that when we make the connections between those questions, they kind of start to infect each other a little bit, you know, because this idea of the mystical and of the experience that you can have when you're living through it, and then bringing it into this first question of what identity or what persona you would like to experience. You said yourself that you're not like a religious person, but actually then in the first question, this is something that becomes interesting to explore, actually, what it's like to be devoted, what it's like to have this kind of like almost religious spiritual practice, which is providing you multiple mystical experiences on the daily basis, just to see what it would be like, and maybe to, you know, just to like experience it, to take a part of it with you. I would also be curious to kind of finalize this relational analysis of the two questions, to think the other way around, and to think again of this difference, you know, between the mystical. So right now I'm gonna do this, actually. I'm gonna try to see at the difference between the two ones, which would be like this. Okay, so what did you answer that was part of the mystical? In mystical, but not in the ideas. Yes. So we reverse and we look into what was in the first question that was not in the mystical. So can we inform the mystical question with any of those ideas? And here we have, can even look at the graph. So providing choosing parameters. So this was about like parameter of someone else's persona or a type of personality that you would choose to be, and then to witness something with the high contrast. So then I would be very curious to make this connection. Okay, let's try to bring this non-existent discourse into the talk about mystical that we have. Can you think of any sort of mystical experience that you could have that would actually allow you to witness this totally different way of seeing the world? So you mentioned already something about the mystical experience in itself, like someone devoted, let's say, who is providing you a super different perspective. But can you also think of something specific, let's say, like a kind of mystical experience that you would like to have, that you would that you've never had, that you would be curious to try? So it provides you this kind of experience of the mystical, but that would be in contrast to what you've experienced so far.
Yeah, I see. I mean, again, I find this little paradox, because sometimes the mystical is something that maybe you cannot predict or have the idea or the concept beforehand, or
Mm-hmm.
um, so this is where I find the extra difficulty of answering your question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but once again, I will try to go into what is the mystical associated to the body.
Mm-hmm.
What are those things that when the mystical actually happens in the body?
Mm-hmm. Because this is something that you've never experienced, also to experience mystical in the body.
Oh, I have experienced it, but something, I mean, a completely different sensation or experience I would like to
Ah, right. So you would like to maybe like you already experienced something mystical in the body, but if you went for something completely different mystical that than what you've experienced before, you would choose a body experience that you've never had that was this kind of mystical experience, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And can you think of what it could be? I understand it's hard to answer because it almost like it says what is not possible. Can we put the words on it? But it's not possible by default. But maybe just to kind of like advance a little bit further in this direction, to hint a little bit on what could it be that you could search for as a mystical experience in the body that you would never have, but that you would like to try.
And on one hand, there are also many things. No, each time that you practice any form of yeah, body practice or internal body practice, you know that there is a whole pathway to be to go through, and there are different also stages. So I would be also very curious about what are those stages that I haven't had yet any experience of them. For example, with the work of with the Neigong or Qigong, what happens when the body is already some levels that you can mobilize the chi in your body. You can have, can yeah have a very accurate um, perception of the energy moving in your body and how you can also deliver energy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Something like this that I hear testimonials or but just words I cannot even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
That.
Okay. It would also be very interesting to think, okay, so if we talk about this, um, and we talk about a completely different experience of the mystical, you already do body practices and you already do this kind of like Tai Chi practice. So if we talk about different, it still stays at the category of the practice that you are already practicing. But can you think of something maybe that would be even outside of the practice in itself? If we go completely into this idea of alterity and become really radical in
Okay,
it.
I have one.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine that I will be a sailor, somebody that spends a lot of time in the sea,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which I have never done.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what kind of spirituality can you actually find in being in the ocean for many days on your own?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Something like this, for example.
Okay, and that would be something interesting for you, or you mentioned it more as an example of something completely different?
Example of something completely different.
And what could be something that is completely different that could also be interesting for you to try? I'm just following the questions here. Like you had the mountain gliding experience, you had the body experience, you can't think of a religious experience, but is there something that could be mystical that would be not part of any of those categories that you would still like to try, or that's kind of like I mean, it's also fine if nothing comes to mind. It means we exhausted the subject for now.
No, I think that the one I mentioned before is something that maybe I would like to have.
The sailor in the sea, or some kind of like experience of the mystical, which is not from religion, not from body practice, but more from a situation that you find yourself in, right? Some kind of like everyday occupation.
Yeah.
Hmm. There's a particular reason why it's like a sailor in the sea. Is it something that you feel somehow that resonates for you in a certain way, or?
Yeah, I think that I relate. Don't know why the mystical with this kind of minimalism of water and sky on the
Mm.
horizon. Some kind of like a Mark Rothko painting.
Mm-hmm. Of who?
Something that Mark Rothko,
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm.
something like this.
Okay.
Or even in the movie of Jerry of Van Sant,
Ah,
no?
yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
There is some kind of this landscape of the desert, and
Nice.
um, that could be some kind of yeah. The problem is that my good friend will die.
Yeah. But you don't have to follow the movie fully in its plot also to get the experience, no? I think it was mystical enough before the death happened, or?
Death is in itself an experience of the mystical, I guess. No, like,
Mm-hmm.
so that could be like a whole new chapter about speaking about the mystical.
Yeah, it's true.
People who die and return to life, or they were technically speaking some minutes dead, and then
Yeah, it's true. This is interesting. Actually, this is really like a radical way to be in someone else's shoes, to try to actually be the person who dies and has like experiences this clinical death and then comes back to life, right? Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, I like how we came to these really unlikely scenarios through these explorations. It's pretty full on now. This this is the both graphs, mystical experience, time, world, body, person, perspective. Let me just open it again in this way where we can see this two questions shared for one last time. It's funny because just like we are both having a conversation, we made the questions and the answers also have the conversation now, actually. In the end, they talked to each other, both questions a little bit. They asked each other questions and answered each other's answers. Let's see them both. So this is a kind of like an overview. Mystical experience body. This is the first one. Talked about mystical experience. And we had this time. Time was pretty important concept in this conversation. Also this idea of walking. Then you had people and person and dimensions of being a person. And then also choosing an identity profile. So choosing some kind of profile of identity that you could be. Then there is more, but these were the most important ones. So I think it was a pretty full conversation, covered a lot of topics. We can end it here, continue another time. Do you want to add something to this before we close? Some feelings, feedback, thoughts, ideas,
yeah,
questions?
um, I think that the book and the infranodus they complement each other very well. This is why I think that the book could suggest the readers to have this tool as an option. That, or at least there could be some kind of continuation of the conversation, either next to the computer or that they record it and then later they can type in to analyze it instead of real time like as you did now. It's
Mm-hmm.
also like a lot of work. Uh, they could do it afterwards as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought that for the book, maybe we could propose that there is a form of indexing, or yeah, like cross references at the beginning of the book or at the end that could suggest to that some questions could actually be asked in the frame of another question. That's what we did now. Also to see how then all of a sudden it opens up like something else.
So some kind of like, let's say that you answer a certain question, and then there is a proposition not only to have the variance of the question, but then to go like, okay, now as we've done through all the variants, let's try to connect this question to another question and ask this question in the context of another question. So not to ask the next question, but rather to go into the question with that thematic.
That, or as soon they have done already 2 questions, the possibility of now bringing both answers together and see what you did now with me. You know, we already, I answered to you the both questions, and then it was afterwards.
Right.
When putting them together, something else happened. So that could be also like another way of that there could be like some form of instructions that the book suggests this kind of combinations or these ways.
Right. Yeah, here we actually followed a really precise procedure because we just looked into this feature of infranodus that compares two texts and then shows you what's missing in one that is not in the other. And this is what directed us to see like, okay, so what exists in the first one that is not in the second? And this is how it made us elaborate a little bit more on the question. So we choose, for example, mystical, and then we go like, okay, now show us what is in the mystical, but not in the first one about the different perspectives on life. And then we go here, and then it shows us, okay, this is the stuff that are in the mystical, but not in the perspective of life. So it can be interesting then to bring in what is not in the perspective on life into this question, you know? So we're not only connecting the questions, but we're rather saying, okay, try to think of something that you answered in the last question that you didn't talk about at all in the first one, and try to bring it in and see how it could inform and maybe propose you a different perspective that you didn't think of in relation to this question. And then we do the other way around, that we just like, here it's also just a button, and then it goes like, okay, and now what was in the question on the personalities that was not in the question on the mystical? So for example, here it's something still left about the world and worldview and parameters, choosing parameters and so on, age also, you know, like you said something about your grandfather, but maybe we could go deeper into that age question and so on. So this is kind of like a very precise procedure, which can also be pretty interesting, I think, to explore. Nice. Okay, well then I'm going to stop the recording here, but we will continue talking, and maybe we do more soon. Thank you very much for your answers and for opening up, for speaking about personal things. It was very interesting. I liked hearing about this sun and the mountains, made me want to go there myself and to feel something like this. This is what I also like with the book sometimes, that you just like, you hear someone speak or you answer the questions and you think like, oh, I would like to actually make an experience like this for myself again, you know? Or to try this out. Okay, thank you.